All right. So now moving on to our next topic, and certainly the one selfishly, I'll say I'm most interested in hearing from you about, either, if not tonight, through our feedback form on our webpage, which I'll cover off again. But I just wanted to again highlight, we've done a lot of work in the recent months about this topic in the long-term energy solution for Aquidneck Island. And I'm going to introduce you to Steve Caldwell, who has led that as our Director of Gas Business Strategy overall. And he's going to walk you through, why we're in the situation we're in and really the path forward for us. So with that, Steve, it's all yours.
Thanks, Brian. Good evening to everyone who's joining us on the Zoom, and thank you all for taking the time this evening to learn more about the Aquidneck Island long-term gas capacity study. So as Brian mentioned, I led the development of this study, but we're a broad team from National Grid that developed it with me. And so I'll provide a brief overview. I'll do most of the talking now, providing an overview of what our study covers. The study, of course, which is available on our website, goes into a lot more detail than I'll be able to cover in the next several minutes. But we're also joined by several of the subject matter experts from National Grid who were responsible for detailing and evaluating the different options we covered in our study, as well as doing other analysis that's presented in the study. And so they'll be able to participate in our Q&A that follows as needed, so we have the benefit of their participation. But Michael, we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So when we looked for long-term solutions for Aquidneck Island, we have to solve for two challenges to making sure that we can reliably meet customers' energy needs, including on the coldest days. And you see those enumerated here. So the first one is what we call a gas capacity constraint. Now, to describe what that is, we start with mentioning that in light of changes to how the gas pipeline serving the island operates, National Grid now faces a gap between what our customers' projected peak demand is for gas on the coldest days for which we plan, and what we can actually count on reliably getting from the gas pipeline. So that gap that we face today just gets bigger over time as we expect customer demand to increase in the coming years, for example, from population growth, economic activity, continued customer switching from fuel oil and propane to natural gas. The second distinct need that we're solving for in the study is what we call a gas capacity vulnerability. What we mean by this is that Aquidneck Island's position at the end of the pipe on the gas pipeline system that serves one of the two gas pipeline systems that serves Rhode Island makes it vulnerable to any upstream incidents or disturbances on that interstate gas pipeline. And that can lead to service interruptions if they're severe enough and it's cold enough out. So what we're doing in the study and what we're going to talk about tonight is reviewing options to solve both of those needs for Aquidneck Island. So Mike, we can go to the next slide, please. So we see here is just an illustration of that first need, the gas capacity constraint. National Grid has an obligation to ensure safe, reliable service to our customers. So in order to do this, we have to plan to meet our customers' needs for natural gas on extremely cold days. To do this, we look at the weather patterns for Rhode Island, and we plan to be able to meet customers' needs even if temperatures drop down to what we call our design day. It's an official term we use for describing that coldest day for which we plan. And in Rhode Island, what a design day is it's a day that averages -3 degrees Fahrenheit, which in any given winter has about a 1 in 60 chance of happening. But that's the kind of day that if you lost your heat because we didn't have enough gas, it would be a severe impact for customers. So right now, we can't count on being able to get enough gas just via the existing interstate gas pipeline that serves Aquidneck Island on that coldest day for which we plan. So over the next 15 years, we anticipate that as gas demand grows, as more homes and businesses are built and more residents switch to natural gas from other fuels, we're going to need even more gas on those extremely cold days. And you can see that on the left-hand side of this slide, the yellow line there is showing you what we can get reliably from the existing interstate gas pipeline, and you can see our projected peak demand in this coming winter being a bit above that. So we have a little bit of a gas constraint there. And then going out 15 years into the future, you can see as gas demand grows, that constraint gets more severe. I think you'd call it a pink, light purple line at the top is what the gas capacity that's available to us when we're counting the Old Mill Lane LNG. So you can see that provides us plenty of capacity now and into the future. And then we size the options we'll talk about now to be similar in capacity to that, so that they're providing enough gas capacity on those coldest days. So Michael, we can go to the next slide, please. So in the short term, National Grid, as we've talked about, has taken steps to address this gas capacity constraint. So I won't go into any detail really on the portable LNG operations at Old Mill Lane, except to note that, as mentioned, the need that's solving the gas capacity constraint, we really only see on the coldest days. So, for example, this past winter, we didn't need to call in Old Mill Lane portable LNG at all to vaporize gas. Nonetheless, it provides critical backup gas capacity. So, to provide a numerical example of how the Old Mill Lane portable LNG in this case, but how other options in the report address that capacity vulnerability we talked about. On the coldest of days, Old Mill Lane could actually supply 50% of Aquidneck Island's gas demand on its own if we had an upstream pipeline disruption. So that provides contingency capacity. You could almost think about it as an insurance policy almost in the event that there was a pipeline disruption to avoid or limit the extent of any service interruptions. So we can go to the next slide, please, Michael. So with the portable LNG solution in place for now, we wanted to decide on the best long-term solution to meet the energy needs of Aquidneck Island. And as Brian mentioned, to that end, we spent the last several months identifying and evaluating what those potential options were. And we brought forth in the study that's on our website and what we'll talk about momentarily, 4 different options to allow the community to provide some feedback and ask questions about those before National Grid makes any final decision on them. So to just emphasize again, we value the community's feedback, and that's what tonight's about. And we've not proposed any solutions that we don't think are safe for residents and for National Grid employees. And so if you look at the study, we don't evaluate the options on safety, and that's because safety is not a differentiator. They're all safe. We wouldn't propose a solution that we weren't confident was safe. We can move to the next slide, please, Michael. So when we were looking at potential options, we cast a very wide net, and that's what you can see at the top there, is the range of different types of options that we evaluated in the study. We looked at everything from portable LNG, as we already have in place as at least a stopgap measure, to new pipeline infrastructure, interstate gas pipeline infrastructure, to renewable natural gas and hydrogen. We evaluated the need, as we talked about before, right, identifying these 2 distinct needs, quantifying them over time, and then we identified 4 broad approaches that you can think of as providing long-term solutions for Aquidneck Island. And so I'll tee up these quickly now that you see on the slide here, and then we'll go into them each in turn and provide a little more detail. The first one on the list, sorry, Michael, can we go back to the first slide, the previous slide for just another moment? Thanks, sorry about that. Miscue on my part. The first one on the list is what we call an exclusively non-infrastructure solution. So this means no ultimate reliance in the once the solution is fully in place on LNG or any new gas pipeline infrastructure. We would just rely entirely on reducing gas demand sufficiently to meet both the gas capacity constraint and the gas vulnerability need in Aquidneck Island. And that would happen through gas energy efficiency, gas demand response, and heat electrification. That is switching people from gas for heating to use of electric heat pumps. The second one is to implement a new LNG solution at a site other than Old Mill Lane. There are a couple of different variations on this. We've identified some potential new Navy-owned properties that could host either portable or even permanent LNG storage, and we looked at an LNG barge option. The new Navy-owned properties have the ancillary benefit of actually providing a new location where the company could develop some low-carbon or zero-carbon hydrogen energy facilities that would further the state's decarbonization agenda. We'll talk about that again a little bit more in a moment. The third option is a new interstate pipeline project. So this could vary in scope, but for the purpose of this report, we looked at a relatively small project in terms of a system reinforcement that would address the capacity vulnerability need that we defined for Aquidneck Island. And then the last option is what you might think of as the status quo, which is to continue reliance on the portable LNG operations at Old Mill Lane, at least through the 15-year duration of the study that we presented, which would that solution would address the needs essentially indefinitely. One thing to note around this is that any solution you pursue requires continued reliance for at least the next few winters on Old Mill Lane's portable LNG, because all of them take time to displace it. If you go down the road of actually displacing, nothing can be ready immediately. And the last note is that while we looked at a purely non-infrastructure solution, National Grid actually sees value in pairing any of these options with incremental gas energy efficiency and demand response targeted to Aquidneck Island, in addition to any infrastructure that we might pursue, because there are benefits from doing that. For example, you can bolster the resiliency that you get from an LNG option in the face of a pipeline disruption by reducing demand through those incremental measures, or you could reduce the likelihood that you'd actually need to rely on LNG by reducing demand through those incremental energy efficiency or demand response measures. So now we can jump to the next slide, please. So the first one we'll do a bit of a deep dive in is the non-infrastructure solution. And you can see here we've got a couple of pictures illustrating some of these measures in terms of smart thermostats for demand response and a home weatherization job there down the bottom. But the first option we assessed was a very ambitious non-infrastructure option. With this option, we aim to meet the capacity constraint and the vulnerability needs without any additional investment in gas infrastructure, such as pipeline or any new LNG storage. Although, as noted, we would need to rely on Old Mill Lane portable LNG storage for several additional years while these new demand-side programs ramped up. But this option requires a very aggressive and unprecedented level of gas demand reduction that includes incremental gas energy efficiency, gas demand response, which would be things like home weatherizations, and then demand response is essentially a matter of providing incentives to businesses and to homeowners to switch to reduce their peak demand. In the case of businesses, that largely happens by giving them incentives to switch to fuel oil on just the coldest days, and that allows us to have more headroom on the gas pipeline to meet the demand that we have. The demand reduction that's needed to address the gas capacity and gas vulnerability needs on Aquidneck, though, is such that you can't get there alone with just energy efficiency and demand response. You've actually got to pursue a very aggressive level of heat electrification, of providing incentives to customers to switch from gas heating to electric heat pumps, or for customers who would otherwise have switched to gas from fuel oil, or might have done new construction, new businesses, new homes, and pursue gas heating to get them to pursue electric heating. And so that gets you to the point where by the end of our 15-year study, in order to address both the needs on Aquidneck Island, we calculate that you'd have to get about 2/3 of the gas customers that we otherwise would have had to have switched to electric heat pumps. So that's essentially pretty unprecedented, but it gives you a sense of the level of ambition behind this option. So that wraps that one up. We can go to the next one, please, Michael. So our second option is to establish a new portable or permanent LNG storage facility on an alternative location. So we've previously had LNG operations at Naval Station Newport up until a few years ago, so we did look into that as to whether or not we could just go back to that site, but we don't believe that location is available as an option to us, and so we're looking at different sites. There are a number of reasons why that site is not suitable, including the Navy having other plans for the land, us having a short-term lease for it that doesn't extend as a long-term option. There's security considerations that prevent us from having sufficient access to be able to use LNG there when we really need it for reliability, and other reasons that are detailed in the report. So to that end, as mentioned, we have worked with the Navy and found some other sites that we could use on the old Navy sites that we could use that would be appropriate for either portable or permanent LNG storage. Having a new site on the island that we initially used for LNG would also allow us to potentially build that out to produce hydrogen as a kind of clean energy investment. And we think that in the long run, this could actually catalyze a hydrogen energy hub for the island, where we could be producing hydrogen from electricity, which is a clean fuel, blending it into the gas network as a low carbon heating supply, and potentially even storing it and distributing it across the island and other places for meeting different energy needs. One of the key things about the LNG options at the other Navy sites is that because these sites are on the western side of the island and they're relatively far from our existing gas network, we'd have to extend our gas distribution pipes to reach them, which means it takes about 4 to 6 years to stand up a new LNG operation on one of the new Navy sites. And that also contributes substantially to the cost of these options. A cheaper option than building standing up a new LNG site on land at one of the Navy sites is the development of an LNG barge, which is an option where we have an LNG barge to be moored a few miles offshore the Aquidneck Island, and that it would have a self-contained operation that would store and vaporize LNG as needed. So for those of you who are familiar with similar concepts proposed in the early 2000s around LNG, this barge concept is different. Those things that were pursued earlier were not successful. And it's a relatively new business concept, actually, that we've seen a few applications of in the U.S. so far. But that relative novelty of it means we need to do significant outreach, we think, to educate stakeholders and members of the public were we to try and implement the LNG barge option. And you can see on this, just in terms of the illustrations, you can see going from Counterclockwise in the top left corner, a picture of the portable LNG operations, and you can see an illustrative permanent LNG storage facility. And then going to the bottom right, you can see some hydrogen storage tanks, what those might look like. And then in the top right, an LNG barge. And just to note, these are all illustrative. They're not actual. They're not actually meant to be illustrations of or actual depictions of what we would specifically do on Aquidneck Island, just to give everyone a sense of what we're talking about here for those who are not too familiar with them. If we can go to the next slide, Michael. So that brings us to the third of our options, which is a gas transmission pipeline project. This is probably the most reliable option. Traditionally in the gas industry, we think about gas pipelines as being the most reliable source of supply. And it's a project on the existing natural gas pipeline that serves Aquidneck Island. And it would include, at a minimum, pipeline system reinforcements, including likely a second pipeline from the mainland over to Aquidneck Island, which would reduce that single point of failure, give us some redundancy there. Importantly, there's no project currently proposed by the interstate pipeline, although we've had discussions with them. So this is really, there's no official projects for us to look to in terms of the scope and the cost and a timeline, but we made our best guesses in the study as to what this project would entail, how long it would take to come into service, and what it might cost. It also requires some collaboration between Rhode Island and Massachusetts, because the project would have benefits both for Aquidneck Island and for Cape Cod. And so we'd look to hopefully share the cost between the two states and our customers in both states. We do see, in terms of implementation risk, we do see gas pipelines running into substantial stakeholder opposition across the Northeast in recent years. So this would be another option where public engagement and consultation would be key for successful implementation. A gas pipeline project is a relatively costlier option. We'll see in a moment when we get to costs how that's true, even if we assume that there's a cost sharing between Rhode Island and Massachusetts gas customers. And implementation would have there would be many requirements for implementation. So the pipeline would need to secure the required approvals that it needs to construct the project, including from the federal government in the form of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And in addition, we would need to keep Old Mill Lane running for most of the next decade, really, while that project came into service, and while we scaled up some accompanying demand side programs to make sure that this option could address both the gas capacity vulnerability and the gas capacity constraint needs. And you can see on this slide there's some stock images of what these gas pipelines look like during the construction phase. With that, Michael, could we jump to the next slide? Thanks. And so the final option in the study is simply to continue with the status quo, right? To continue operations at Old Mill Lane with the portable LNG we have there now. So this, as we talked about before in the slide with the bar charts, Old Mill Lane provides substantial incremental capacity on the island, and it allows us to address both the gas capacity constraint and the vulnerability needs essentially indefinitely. And in the cost analysis that we'll get into in a moment, it turns out to be the lowest cost option. We've also proposed pairing the portable LNG at Old Mill Lane with some incremental energy efficiency and demand response programs targeted on Aquidneck Island. That would have the benefit of allowing us to maintain more of the insurance policy, in effect, that the LNG on Aquidneck Island gives us, so we could offset some of the projected gas demand growth over time, and so you'd have just the same amount, or roughly the same amount of contingency capacity should there be an upstream pipeline disruption, and you'd maintain some of that ability to avoid or minimize customer service interruptions. As a final consideration, this site is only expected to be used on extremely cold days, as we've mentioned, and is demobilized at the end of the winter, so as to minimize disruptions. We talked earlier, of course, about the actual operations of that site. So with that, we can go to the next slide, Michael. If you read the study, you'll see that we go through several different evaluation parameters. We do what we call a multi-criteria evaluation in the study, and we rate each of the options on these criteria. So we don't have time to go into that now, but I encourage you, if you're interested, to take a look at that study. I'll just for now call out what some of the key criteria we use are. And touch on a couple of key themes. So we evaluated every solution from many different angles, from costs to community impact to environmental concerns. We also thought through the long-term decarbonization and climate change impacts of the different options and how each of them can fit with the clean energy agenda goals for the state of Rhode Island. But you can see here that options vary in terms of how quickly we could get out of Old Mill Lane, or if that ever happens, right? So obviously, if you pursue the fourth option, the continued use of it, that never happens. But then the infrastructure solutions allow you to do it substantially earlier than the pipeline or the non-infrastructure does. The non-infrastructure solution, for example, you're looking at waiting for those programs to ramp up, waiting for more than a decade before you could you face out the portable LNG. Michael, if we can jump to the cost slide. Next slide, thank you. So one of the most important considerations, of course, is cost in terms of what option to pursue, and affordability, right? It's a consideration that's increasingly important or top of mind in the current circumstances with many customers impacted by the economic recession and the pandemic. What this chart shows is the measure of cost, the primary measure of cost that we use in the study. It's what we use is something called net present value of the implementation cost for the utility. So it's a little bit complicated, and I encourage you to read the full report to get the full details. But you can essentially think about the net present value that we're presenting here as the cumulative cost over the full 15 years that the study examines of the cost that will eventually flow through to our gas customers' bills. And we do it this way so that we can present each of the options on an apples-to-apples basis over the lifetime of the whole time horizon for the study. And what you can see from this pretty clearly is that the Old Mill Lane portable LNG status quo option is by far the least costly option, followed by the LNG barge in terms of affordability. And then after that come the different, in the middle of the chart there, the different variations on LNG at the new Navy site, which depending on whether you go directly for, say, a permanent LNG storage facility, or whether you stand up portable LNG at the Navy site and then replace that with permanent LNG, you can have different levels of cost there. Following that comes the interstate pipeline project as the second most costly option, and then the most costly option in this NPV analysis is the pursuit of an exclusively non-infrastructure option. Now, I will add one note here on this cost, which is that while the non-infrastructure solution is the most costly project in this net present value analysis we're presenting here, we also looked at options through a different lens, so taking a broader societal lens in terms of such things as valuing the avoided greenhouse gas emissions you might get from energy efficiency, for example, and then benefits that some solutions you deploy in the next 15 years would have, well beyond that. For example, if you weatherize a home in 2035, you're going to get energy savings, for maybe a decade or more after that. And so when you take this broader societal and longer term lens, that shifts the numbers a little bit, and you end up getting the non-infrastructure solution being more competitive and about on par with the LNG barge option, although Old Mill Lane is still far and away the most affordable option in terms of just cost. As a final note before I turn things back over to Brian, I'll just on the subject of cost, talk a little bit about cost recovery. And so you might have questions of how do these options all get paid for. Under the current regulatory approach, the cost of this solution specifically for Aquidneck Island would actually be paid for by all of the gas customers that National Grid has in Rhode Island. In addition, there are different ways that National Grid collects the costs of different options. So some of the options, such as the Old Mill Lane LNG option and the interstate pipeline option, are pure pass-throughs to our customers, just like the cost of the natural gas that we provide, because they're essentially options that flow through just like the cost of energy does. We're not making any capital investments. We don't earn any return or make any profit off the options. For some of the other options, where National Grid actually does have to make incremental capital investments in new infrastructure, as a regulated utility, we do earn a regulated profit level on that, regulated by the Rhode Island Public Utility Commission. And so some options do involve that. So, for example, if we went to do new LNG on a new Navy site, we'd make company capital investments in that. Similarly, if we did the LNG barge, there'd be some capital investments involved in connecting that infrastructure, and we have a regulated level of profit that we make on any company capital investments. But with that takes us through a quick survey of all the four main approaches, a review of the cost, and some notes on cost recovery. And I'll turn it back to you, Brian.